and using universal design for learning to accommodate students with disabilities. A presentation by Kristen, DeAnne Anderson, March 5th, 2021, and Exceptional Children 523 with Professor Chelsea Stinnett. Before we begin, I believe it's important that we look at the children's right to read. And this is something that, as school librarians, we need to be constantly reminding ourselves of. And when it comes to children with disabilities, it is especially important to think about the rights that every child has, no matter their ability or disability, to access the library. So quickly, I'll just read through these because I think they're so important. Children have the basic human right to read. Children have the right to access texts in print and digital formats. Children have the right to choose what they read. Children have the right to read texts that mirror their experiences and languages, provide windows into the lives of others, and open doors into our diverse world. Children have the right to read for pleasure. Children have the right to supportive reading environments with knowledgeable literacy partners. Children have the right to extended time set aside for reading. Children have the right to share what they learn through reading by collaborating with others locally and globally. Children have the right to read as a springboard for other forms of communication, such as writing, speaking, and visually representing. Children have the right to benefit from the financial and material resources of governments, agencies, and organizations that support reading and reading instruction. All of that just applies so much to students with disabilities. And also, before we begin learning about universal design for learning, it's important that we think about how important it is to just learn about our students. If we don't know the needs of our students, we won't know the type of curriculum that would be best for that class or those students. So a great place to start is to collaborate with the general education teachers, special education teachers, and the parents of the students. So you're really getting information about the students and their needs straight from the source of those that know these kids the best. And another thing to think about is the fact that there are some things you don't understand about a student or their disability. So we need to look further into that sometimes, even on our own, not just collaborating with the special ed teachers. So as librarians, we are information experts by definition. So we know and are trained on how to find and retrieve information. We have access to all the databases. We can look for information on certain disabilities that students might have and what kind of accommodations might be helpful to them. We also need to think about the fact that librarians need to be learning about special education before they become librarians. So what that means is that in the master's level library and information science program, there definitely needs to be education for future librarians on disabilities and accommodating them. And then after we become school librarians, we need to make sure that we're continuing that education on disabilities, whether it be through conferences or reviewing new information and studies as they come out. Okay, so what is universal design for learning? According to the text Inclusion, Effective Practices for All Students, Universal Design for Learning, or UDL for short, is a curriculum design process that provides guidelines for developing learning activities and ways that make them more accessible to learners with various ability levels. That involves using multiple means of presentation, expression, and engagement. It also means being flexible in the ways the information is presented, the way the students respond, and in the ways the students are engaged. One way to incorporate this type of learning into any classroom is to make sure there are clear goals for the students. It's great to have them clearly posted. You can also encourage the students to be part of their own personal goals and write them down in their notebooks. And it's also important for our librarians to think about being a part of the individualized education plan process for students with disabilities. Although it may not always make sense for the school librarian to be present at the IEP meetings, it would be great for them to at least contribute information on the students' literacy goals. And as we said about universal design for learning, a very important part of that means that there needs to be multiple means of learning. So there needs to be options for assignments. In the school library, there are so many fun options for learning about literacy and information retrieval. The library is not just about books, so the students should be made aware of magazines, graphic novels, ebooks, audiobooks, podcasts, apps, websites, films. You can do centers that have games, props, and puzzles. For example, if learning about a certain book in the school library, you can have different centers set up where students can use different learning methods to learn about that book. They can sit at a center where they use a touch screen to play a game on an app about that particular book. Another center, they can draw pictures about the book. Another center, they can have Legos where they can build a structure from the book. There can be a quiet area where they can wear headphones and listen to an audiobook to help them understand. The library is a great place for children to learn that there are many different ways to learn, and it's not just about using our eyes to read and translate into our brain. And some of these assignment options included digital materials, and I want to further zero in on that because this is very important for the school library and also for many students with disabilities. So the reason digital materials are so important is because they provide so many different options. For example, text enlargement, screen color and contrast, videos with captions. You can use transcripts for audio, and digital materials can provide links to more information like definitions of certain words. Text to speech, read alouds are also something that can help students that have trouble with the visual aspect of reading. For example, it's very helpful for children who struggle with dyslexia. Now, if your library does not have access to as many digital materials and there isn't a way to update that at the current time, there are also digital materials there where you can, or there are also apps out there where you can convert your hard copy items into digital items. So one of those apps is called Snapverter, and that can be very helpful and convenient. Learning preferences really ties back to the two previous slides when we would be getting to, learning preferences really ties back to two previous slides when we would be getting to know our students and also assignment options. So there are so many different assignment options like we talked about, but it's important to know which of these work for your students and how many different options you should include for this particular class and which ones work and which ones maybe don't. So one thing you can do is to just ask your students. You can make a survey, let them have a choice in the matter also. But it is important to keep in mind that preferences do not always equal what's best for the student. So as we said earlier, you can always consult that IEP and special educators, but it's good to know what students like and what they think works for them. Another very important part of UDL would be giving regular feedback to the students. Check in frequently, provide feedback to them, repeat instructions if needed. Adjust your pacing if it seems like that's needed when you're checking in with them. Give visual cues and reminders. This feedback can go both ways. Because when you check in with your students, you can tell them what you're saying and needing, and they can tell you what they're needing, and you can adjust, which goes back to that concept of flexibility. Here are just some extra accommodations to think about that are important in the school library setting, and some additional resources that are important to consider, such as low-level, high-interest books. That means if there are some students that maybe read at a lower level because of any type of disability, but they might still want to read about something age appropriate for them. They don't want to read baby books. And large print books can be very useful, books with non-stereotypical portrayals of children with disabilities, because all children deserve to feel represented in their school library. As far as instructional delivery accommodations, again, we want to make sure we're using repetition of instruction, adjustment to pacing, visual cues and reminders, guided instruction on how to use the library, pairing students for helping each other, using big books with big illustrations and words, and of course, making sure our library has all the physical accommodations needed for any students with disabilities, such as it is wheelchair accessible. Do we have braille books? Do we have touch screens and modified keyboards? These can all be very important. These are the references that I used today, and thank you so much for listening to my presentation on school librarians using the universal design for learning to accommodate their students with disabilities. It's a topic that I'm passionate about, and I can't wait to put into practice when I become a school librarian soon. Have a great day.